Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for RunOnce.com. Today I'm going to be diving into part 3 in this series in which I play some mid-stakes no limit, and I played it with the focus on exploiting my opponents rather than playing a balanced GTO style, because that's something, as I've said in the previous 2 parts, which I recommend you watch, or kind of recommend you watch, more in a minute. It's something that I think has gone too far in like the minds of the poker community. I think that GTO is, in a sense, the future, and I think that it's very important to understand balance and understand game theory and understand your ranges. It's extremely important, especially as you move up higher in stakes and against tougher and tougher competition. But I think that so many times people ignore a really profitable play for the sake of game theory or the sake of balance, and I think there's still plenty of room to exploit opponents, even in the highest stakes games available now. So that's, just an insight into why I made the series. I'll be interested to see where this third part goes. The first part, I recorded the audio soon after I played, and I was very happy with the way that I played in that portion of the footage, and things, not everything worked out, but a lot of things worked out, or my reads were pretty solid. In the second part, which I reviewed at a later date, my thinking at the time of recording was a lot different than my thinking at the time of playing, for whatever reason. And so I'm curious to see how this one, how I review my play, or how I assess my play in this one. And I click play so that I don't talk for longer than I need to. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I have been playing live poker for the last month and a half. I'm now finishing up my summer in Vegas. This is a hand, that I'd 3-bet on the top right. Queen 10 offsuit is not strong enough, in my opinion, to call against a button open, but has at least one very relevant blocker and 2 somewhat relevant blockers in terms of hands that can call a 3-bet. And Queen blocks hands that can 4-bet. I guess 10s can 4-bet too, but point being, this is I think, profitable 3-bet, and I guess you'd call it a 3-bet bluff, but I would just call it a 3-bet. Yeah, so I've been playing live poker for the last very long time. Month and a half is a very long time to me. And actually, literally, for the last very long time, I just came off of a 30-hour session and then 14 hours of sleep. So I don't know if that will leave me well-rested or the opposite. I guess we'll see. On this bottom right table, 8-6 suited is a hand that I would fold here, although I don't think it's a terrible hand to 3-bet. I think when somebody opens an early position, the hands you get called by when you 3-bet make it such that I think this is a better 3-bet hand than Queen 10 offsuit. Even though Queen 10 offsuit offers a little more in the way of blockers, an early position opener's range is going to be a little stronger, so you have a little bit less pre-flop fold equity, and you're going to suffer from some domination issues with Queen 10 offsuit, and not so much with 8-6 suited. One thing that's important to think about is important to know, I should say, is where the kind of collective mind of the kind of game, I don't know if you want to call it the economy, but of the player pool at certain games or stakes, where they are in terms of how they view under the gun opens, or in this case under the gun +1, because it's a 5-handed game, and how they view 3-bets against an early position open. It's kind of fresh in my mind because I've been playing tournaments this summer, and watching some Run It Once tourney videos, which I recommend. They're quite good, and you guys all have memberships. The thing is, I just noticed that it comes kind of like in style and out of style to make different plays in tournament poker, and the same is true in cash games. But I know, for example, there was kind of a movement to people started secretly opening wide under the gun, although you can't get away with it too secretly because everybody has a HUD. Opening to steal under the gun in at least, I guess, at first live poker tournaments and then online tournaments, and for obvious reasons it looks strong. And then what happened is people started 3-betting against under the gun opens, and so now and those were getting respect for a while, more than they should, and so the people that thought they were secretly opening wide under the gun and getting away with it, they'd get 3-bet by players and think, oh well, this guy obviously has a strong hand or a strong range because I'm opening under the gun. And now those guys realize that people 3-bet against under the gun openers light, and I'm not super in touch with the MTT community or their collective mind, or where they're at right now. But I don't know where that's at exactly right now. But that's just an example of how things can kind of evolve in the poker world. And I'm not really sure at 255 NL Zoom where people are in terms of that. And I guess my point there is that there's no substitute for experience, in a sense, or not in a sense. There's no substitute for experience in understanding the way that people are thinking and playing it in the games that you play. And so that's something I don't really bring to the table when I make a video like this. And now I don't know whether I said it or not, but with all this live poker, I've been focusing a lot on exploiting my opponents rather than playing a balanced style for obvious reasons. Because, big games are played worse and further from GTO, and, it's much harder for people to keep track of how you're playing. So on the top right table here, ace-5 offsuit is kind of an ideal 4-bet hand, but it's something you don't want to get too carried away with. Although now I'm talking about balance, and that's not what this series is about. Over a small sample, this guy is pretty high 3-bet. I don't use this HUD anymore, but I believe this was 3-bet in position, 3-bet out of position. Or maybe I do use this HUD, I just haven't used a HUD in 2 months. He has a pretty wide 3-bet, so I think it's a decent spot to 4-bet. Ace-5 offsuit is kind of the ideal 4-bet hand. You have an ace blocker, and when you do get called, in addition to... I just think ace-5 plays a little bit better than ace-7 offsuit due to the gutter. And it's certainly, in my opinion, not strong enough to call. So I don't mind a fold there. I also don't mind a 4-bet bluff. My brain's actually a little bit fried from poker, which in a sense might make it bad time to make a video. But on the other hand, I actually I've just been playing so much and thinking so much. It's kind of nice to just review some footage and get my thoughts out and get out of my head. And I think that kind of when you're playing a lot of poker, as I think many of you guys know, your mind will constantly be going, or at least mine is at and away from the table. And so I hopefully we'll have more thoughts. Or I guess my mind is going to be less autopilot-y in reviewing this footage than normal. So 4s in the small blind, I decided to limp. I remember at the time making this recording, I was playing around with the small blind open limp strategy, which is something that I know a lot of players do, or I believe a lot of players do. It's something that I never did back in my no limit heyday when I was playing a ton of 6-max and heads up no limit. Actually, I limped heads up, but I never limped in 6-max no limit from any position. And I've talked about this in the past, but I think it's tough to... I think for the sake of making a video and experimenting and seeing how things work and providing my thoughts on it, I think it's kind of nice to mix it up, and it's fine to mix it up, but if I were to jump into some 200, 400 no limit games right now, I don't think I'd experiment at that time with limping, even if I think it's a viable strategy, or even if I think it's probably better than just open raising my full VPIP range, because for all the no limit hands I played, I didn't open limp the small blind, and so I'm much more used to how people react to an open raise. And while I don't recommend autopiloting ever, but when there's less to think about, and in this case, I'm not used to thinking about how people react to a limp, and so when people check behind or people raise, I'm going to have more to think about than usual. It's nice to have certain parts of your game on autopilot so that your mind can focus on everything else that's available to you. Whoops, that was a right click when I shouldn't have right clicked. But anyways, I think there's something to be said for allowing yourself to not focus so much on certain situations. So the perfect example is I was playing a lot of no-limit tournaments this summer, not a lot. I played like 9 tournaments, which is a lot for me, but I guess probably half were no limit. And there are a lot of spots where I'm certainly very far from autopiloting, and I have to think a lot about how I want to play each of my hands, how I think tournament players play different spots. I have to keep track of my stack size and everybody else's stack size, and a lot of stuff that occupies my brain space. Whereas, and so when I tried to focus on getting live reads on my opponents, or like exploitative strategies that I think work well that are kind of outside of the box, my brain was already pretty full with all the other things that I had to focus on. Whereas when I played the 6 max PLO, I essentially could autopilot the actual play of hands because I never had to think about how I wanted. I just play so much 6 max PLO that part was very easy to me, and I could focus on where I wanted to deviate from my strategy to exploit my opponents or pay attention to live reads, things like that. Whereas in No Limit, I'm just more rusty, and a lot of things took too much of my brain space up. That's the whole point there. So I think that if I were to play right now, I wouldn't be open limping for that reason. Now that I did open limp and he checks behind, I decided to bet on ace 10-9. I decided to bet pretty big, kind of pretty big. I guess 3/4 pot is not that unusual, but this is a spot where when he checks behind, his range is actually pretty capped, or very capped pre-flop, and also on this board, he doesn't have any of the sets. He doesn't have ace 10, ace 9, maybe he has ace 9. He doesn't have ace 10, and he doesn't have ace jack or better. A lot of 10-9 combos might raise as well. So anyways, I think it's a spot where my range is actually much stronger than his, because I can definitely limp to limp re-raise with some of those hands, or limp to limp call with a lot of ace X hands, and he might raise those as well. Anyways, I decided to bet big, probably to make sure that he didn't try to like float with a gut shot or something like that, because I actually have very poor equity against a gut shot, and I don't have a hand that can double barrel because I have so few outs. 2 to be exact, against any pair. So exploitatively, I wanted to bet a little bigger rather than bet small. With, like, if I had 8-7, I don't mind betting big and betting twice and perhaps 3 times, but with this hand, there are just so few, or like anything with a backdoor flush draw, there are some more turns I can barrel, things like that, like a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. But with this hand, I can't bet any turns, so if I'm going to win the pot from like a gut shot or open ender, I don't know why I keep right clicking, a gut shot or an open ender, I have to win it now. Or obviously a pair. And there is a small chance he could fold a weak 9 here, so I decided to bet big for that reason. Top left table, I'm probably going to 3-bet ace king. Not a lot to talk about. On the bottom right table, I defend in the big blind against a cutoff open. He 3x'd it for whatever that's worth. Goes check on the flop, and I'm not super ecstatic with this turn, mostly because I have no equity. I'm sure I have some equity, but I have no outs that I'm very excited about. So I think just check folding again is probably best. Bottom left table, I'm going to check fold with 6s. And now we have an interesting situation on the bottom right. Looks like I'm considering betting. And I think betting would be a good play well, I shouldn't say a few reasons. The main reason is that I think he folds often enough. But the reason I think he folds often enough is that he does not have a ton of flushes in his range. So let's talk about his cutoff opening range. Let's assume a reasonable range, or not even a reasonable range, but I mean, a somewhat reasonable range. If he's going to have like 1 heart hands, I'm basically trying to think of the 1 heart hands he can have, because when he checks back the flop and the turn, we can eliminate hands with 2 hearts. And then we can also eliminate hands like, queens or kings or jacks with or without a heart. His 1 heart hands should be, in his opening range, should be offsuit broadways and offsuit aces. I don't think he's going to open a lot of like 10-9 offsuit. Even if he does open 10-9 offsuit, I expect those to bet flop or turn. And actually the same can be said for offsuit broadways, king jack, king queen, jack 10. Just because they have no showdown value and no real risk of getting check raised off their hand. If he has a hand like ace queen with 1 heart, I think that's a pretty good candidate to check back flop, and makes a lot of sense because he has plenty of equity. against pretty much any hand, and even like he doesn't mind as much giving a free card to a hand like mine, just because he can call turns pretty much any turn with those hands, and has a little bit in the way of implied odds, but mostly he just has his equities and not going to get blown off his hand, and also doesn't want to get check raised and blown off a hand that strong. So offsuit aces are the main hand I worry about here from Nev Hearts. However, I think some of those would bet the turn if he has ace queen with either heart. I think at this point he might bet the turn. Though again, I don't mind him checking back, or I wouldn't discount him checking back. But something that's important is, a lot of his check back range here, other than that, is going to be occasionally he'll have some give ups because he just thinks I'm going to play tough on 2, 3, 4. But he'll also have some like ace 3 suited, ace 4 suited, basically any suited ace. And the thing about that is that since he's opening the cutoff, I don't think he's going to have ace 4 offsuit, ace 3 offsuit, ace 6, ace 7 offsuit. So I don't expect him to have one heart in his hand unless he has those ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10 hands, and we can discount some of those because he would have bet. So I think more likely than that, we're up against a suited hand that doesn't have a heart, maybe like ace 4, ace 3, and perhaps the occasional give up. And I think against that range, I think he's going to fold often enough. I also don't think he can have like the one heart pair hands because he'd have bet at some point. I think any overpair bets the flop. So I do think we're looking at some give-ups, a lot of suited aces, or maybe some offsuit aces that don't contain a heart. And I think that even though we have no blocker here, I think a bet's going to show a profit. And if this were a heads-up match, or maybe he was opening the button with a wide range, we could be much less confident about him not having some of those offsuit hands in his range. But he does go ahead and fold. King jack suited, easy open. Jack 10 offsuit on the bottom left. Looks like I'm just going to check back. Pretty standard. I don't mind betting, but you're kind of just betting for like one street of value or a little bit of protection, and to uncap your range. I think that, and you're not going to get check raised on that flop too often, but I really just think there's no harm in checking back for the most part. I think it plays better overall. Obviously, you turn 2 pair, and I'm going to go ahead and bet and figure it out from there. But other than king 9 and 9-8, perhaps queen jack. But I don't think he's going to check raise queen jack. I think he'd just lead with that. And even 9-8, I think he might just lead with rather than check raise, and potentially get stacks in against ace king or king 9, which are hands I would definitely play this way. I just think he doesn't have a ton of, in general, he's not going to have many hands better than me, but most of the hands that are better than me just bet into me. Since he doesn't have sets, and he doesn't have ace-king pre-flop, with the exception of 7-7. I'm not very concerned about getting check raised. I guess maybe because I've been playing no-limit tournaments, getting check raised is something that I'm even more focused on, because in no-limit tournaments, pots get so big due to antes, and bet sizes are pretty small, and so a lot of times in a situation like this with jack 10 on queen jack 7, first of all, there's a lot of value in betting 40% pot or half pot, just because you're giving them a price and they call with a lot worse. But because bet sizes are so small, it becomes sometimes just a better option to bet small and take it down rather than allow free cards when pots are so big compared to your stack in late stage no limit tournaments. So I think it's more in my head than usual, wondering or worrying about how often I can get check raised, both credibly and by bluffs. Because obviously, the more they can credibly check raise, the more you're going to get, the more they can bluff, or at least the more apt they'll be to bluff. Looks like I decided to bet king jack suited on the top left. I bet a little small because I think, he's 40 big blind stack, so I don't need to bet much to get stacks in by the river. And also I think on ace 7-4, how do I want to say this? Most of his range is going to respond in a binary way. But basically, it's going to be inelastic to my bet size. he's very rarely going to look at a hand like Queen 10 offsuit and say, oh, well, he bet small, so now I'm going to call, but I was going to check fold. Or that's going to be extremely rare. But also rare will be Queen 10 offsuit, oh, he bet small, I sense weakness, I'm going to check raise. I just don't think it's going to happen very often, nor should it, because I think, I don't know. In theory, I'd be betting this in a balanced way. However, that said, if I'm focusing on exploiting my opponents, which I am in this session, I think with the stronger hand, I'd be more likely to bet big here, or perhaps even a check, because I think that's going to make the most out of my opponent in a vacuum. So this smaller bet size is, in a sense, an exploitative play. 5 of diamonds is no good, in that for a couple reasons. First of all, some of his hands get a little more connected. Like, if he has an ace, he's probably going to call again anyways, and if he doesn't have an ace, his range got more connected with the 5 of diamonds. More importantly, or not more importantly, but also important, it means that I can double barrel with a lot of draws, and I have basically no equity. So he's going to be much more apt to call down once, and maybe twice, turn and river, with an ace, when some draws miss. 10 of diamonds hits and he leads into me, which is strange, especially betting so big. But I have king high. I could potentially lose to some bluffs, although not extremely likely, but I'm not really confident enough to find a call there. I'm a little suspicious, but I think, more likely than anything else, he has like a 2-pair hand that he's afraid to get raised with, or potentially just has like a backdoor flush with an ace and decided to bet big rather than bet small or check raise, which I think is fine. Ace 10 offsuit on the bottom left, I think, is a pretty decent 3-bet hand. Okay, so I decided to call. I was actually just thinking about that in my head, where I do all my thinking. Calling is okay. The argument against 3-betting and 4-calling is that when you 3-bet, you force out a lot of the hands that you dominate, like King 10 offsuit, Queen 10 offsuit, Jack 10 offsuit, Ace 7 offsuit if he's opening that, or Ace X suited. Who knows if he'll call a 3-bet or not. But I think it's also a pretty awkward hand to play out of position. I'm never one to argue. I don't like when people argue initiative for the sake of initiative, because it makes things easier to play. There are a lot of reasons that things seem easier with initiative, and in some senses are, but it's more about leaving your range uncapped than anything else, and it's also because people overvalue the fact that they win more pots when they have the initiative, and they don't realize that the pots that they lose are bigger than the pots that they win in a lot of those spots where they're doing the bluffing. Anyways, I do decide to call. It's kind of whatever. Top left table, I decided to check back on Ace Queen 10. I have no equity, and I think it's a board that I get a lot of credit with a delayed c-bet on. And when I do get called, it's also a board that gets called once and perhaps twice very often, so I don't want to make a no equity bluff. I'd rather just check back and perhaps give up the whole way, or potentially fire a delayed c-bet either on the turn or river. As it turns out, we backdoor trips, and I'm obviously going to bet. If I get led into, I think I opened from the cutoff because this guy was sitting out, so I would have expected him to 3-bet all of these sets. I will be, so let's see. Yeah, he can't have Ace 6 suited because the heart, spade, and diamond are accounted for, and the Ace of clubs is accounted for. So I'm going to raise a bet here, basically because the only hand I lose to is King Jack, and King Jack can't even put in another bet, so I'm not super concerned. I mean, he could put in another bet, but I expect him not to. I actually think it'd probably be good to, but I'm not entirely confident in that, actually. Anyways, long story short, what happens, which is what probably was going to happen, is he checks and I'm going to bet, and I didn't need to go into all that. On the bottom left table, I check call flop with top pair, top kicker on a kind of connected board. I'm going to check call turn and take it from there. I don't think there's a lot to talk about. And on the bottom right table, I open the button and I check back with ace 5 with the 5 of spades on ace jack 4. I think this is a very kind of classic example of a, I don't know what you want to call it, but, value check back in a sense. There's not a lot of value in betting, given that, a lot of the range that calls you does pretty well against your hand. When you get check raised, it's very ugly because you have a hand that can call any turn, like very easily get to showdown and win pretty often, but now you've turned it into a pure bluff catcher on a board that, there's no real good run out for you. So calling a check raise on this flop does not, you don't have implied odds. It never plays out super well for you. So I'd rather avoid that situation, just check back, and do some stabs perhaps, or some light call downs later, but I don't have a multi-street value hand. He bets on the turn spade. I'm not super excited about calling, but I think I should. If I knew that there are some opponents I'd just fold right away to, even though I have somewhere towards the top of my range. I don't know, but people aren't gonna. There's some people who just aren't gonna bluff this board, and my 5 of spades is never gonna be good against them, and so I think there's nothing wrong with folding to some people. But he bet with bottom pair, which is why I call against a lot of opponents, because I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a bluff. I don't know what it is. He doesn't want to get bluffed. I guess it's a bluff. But I think that was kind of a standardly played hand. And now we have a pretty ugly spot after calling twice on the bottom left table. We probably have to check fold this river. Clubs missed, which is a very credible 3-barrel bluff hand. However, not all of his dry clubs with nothing else bet this flop. I think many check back 8-10-7. Especially, well, I wonder what he thinks of my small blind cold calling range, but it should contain a lot of suited broadways, pocket pairs, and maybe some suited connectors. Probably not like 7-8, 7-10. Not 7-10, certainly. Probably 7-8 suited, he'd expect me to 3-bet, and probably he'd be right. So I'm actually not sure how well I connect with this board. I think it actually looks a lot like I have a 10. But fortunately, I have some queen jack of clubs hands, although I probably put in a bet somewhere, an extra bet somewhere with that. And certainly I have a lot of jack 10 suited hands. Or, jack 10, 10-9, I don't know. But jack 10 suited makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure if he's thinking so much about that, but I guess my point was, I think he's going to check back a lot of his ace-6 of clubs on this flop. That actually makes a straight on the turn, or on the river, but let's say ace-5 of clubs, and that's a hand he might barrel off with. So most of his draws got there. I think he bets, his betting range on this flop, he should have a piece pretty often, and every piece is now either showdownable or very strong. And I think, a tough player could take a hand I'm trying to think, if you had ace-9 of spades, or can't now, but ace-9 of hearts, a tough player could potentially play it this way and bluff the river knowing that his 9's not going to be good. But I don't expect most people to do that, and I don't necessarily think it's a great play. I think, unfortunately, my range does look pretty weak because, as I said, I'm going to have a lot of broadways, suited broadways and pocket pairs, and perhaps some hands like this, but my pocket pairs, with the exception of 6-6, which I might fold a turn with, I guess 9-9 is the one thing saving me from just getting bombed on this river by, if we were 1,000 big blinds deep, he could just bomb this river, and I just am too capped, other than 9-9, to do anything about it. But yeah, I think most of my boats he should expect, 10-10 should 3-bet, 7-7 or 8-8 I think should raise the turn. He would expect to raise the turn pretty often, so I think I potentially can get beat up there. But luckily he just checks back, and I don't have to face that decision. So here's an interesting play that didn't work. Goes limp, complete, and check in the big blind. And on ace, king, jack, it gets checked around. So I think the limper is obviously going to be a weaker player due to the fact that I don't think people should be open, limp, and cutoff. I don't think a lot of the tough players do that. And so I decided that with my no equity hand, it's very likely that he just limped a pocket pair, and the small blind completed with whatever. And since the small blind didn't lead out, I expect him never to have 2 pair or better. Probably not ace-10 even, although actually he could have ace-10. But for the most part, he's not going to have huge hands, so I think that if I can make this guy fold his pocket 6s or pocket 7s, and make the small blind fold his king 3 suited or air, whatever he has, I think this will get through often enough, betting 10 into 14. Limper calls, and to me, that means he's going to have a lot of ace-x, either suited or unsuited, although maybe he would bet the flop, but also some king x or maybe jack x. Certainly like king queen type hand makes a lot of sense if you were to open limp that. The jack's pretty interesting. I'm wondering if I'm going to double barrel, or double. I think I can't. He has some jacks in his range, like queen jack, jack 10, and he could just have like jack 9 of hearts and play it that way, just because. Although I don't think he should. But I think I just have to give up here. And he did have queen queen, probably would have folded the river, but I like my play. I mean, obviously I shouldn't normally be betting turn with no outs into 2 people, but I just expect it to be a spot where, for the reasons I said, their ranges are going to be pretty weak. And I take the note that he limped queens in the cutoff. And meanwhile, I flop a straight on the bottom left after, I assume, raising in the cutoff. It's got to be. Nuts, obviously, very tough player. King is a pretty bad turn for us for obvious reasons. I think the best way to play this might be to bet turn check river. I don't expect an ace to raise the turn very often. I expect him to continue repping like a 2-pair or even weak 1-pair hand that wants to get to showdown. I don't mind checking back the turn. However, if I check back the turn in the river bricks, I don't think I can get away with a river value bet, just because he's going to be able to value check raise his aces, which I think he'll do a lot, and I think he'll be able to check raise bluff with his 1-pair hands on the river. Nor am I inducing a bluff ever, or nearly ever, in my opinion, when I check back. So I think there's actually just more value in going for a turn value bet and checking back the river against his 2-pair hands, because I'm not super comfortable getting that value on the river. Question of, can I value bet twice? I think the answer is probably no. Just too many aces in my range, too many aces in his range. And he goes ahead and folds the turn, which is not a bad result. There's a teeny tiny possibility he folded the same hand, like 10-9, although I think it's very unlikely. It's not ridiculous, though, due to the fact that he's going to be facing a lot of river bets and has no equity to improve. I think I'm a little surprised because I thought he had 2-pair a lot and he'd just call, but he can definitely have like a king 5 suited and decide to fold this turn, but it's also fine if his 2-pair hands fold there rather than giving them a free card. Top right, I'd like to 3-bet 9-6 suited. Bottom right's kind of interesting. We face an under-the-gun min-raise with 7s. Can I profitably call here? I think so. I don't think people are going crazy squeezing in these games, and it's actually not the worst result in the world if I get squeezed and this guy calls. I think I can profitably call against a smaller raise size, at least, or like a reasonable squeeze size. Can I 3-bet? I don't really love pocket pairs to turn into 3-bet bluffs. I understand it, but it's almost just like not having cards 80% of the time, and then occasionally 80, 85% of the time, and occasionally you flop something that is great, but I don't often 3-bet bluff with pocket pairs. So I do opt to call. I think that's a good play, and I flop nothing, and I'm not really going to do anything, nor would I ever consider it in that spot. Okay. Top left table, I open with ace-10 offsuit, very standard. I think you can go either way, betting this flop or checking. For balance, I'd like to be betting this flop just because of how often I bet with air. However, I think there might be a little more value in a check in terms of vacuum. Top right table, my 3-bet gets called. King 7 deuce is really, is the perfect example of a very c-bettable flop. So I'm going to go ahead and c-bet and take it from there. I have a couple of backdoor draws, or one backdoor draw basically with my straight draw. And I actually would consider double barreling this board a lot because I think a lot of his range is like pocket 8s, pocket 5s. He calls pretty quickly, which I'm not sure what to make of. Looks like I get some PLO action. Anyways, I'll talk about this first. He calls quickly. There was a time when that meant weakness. I think... All right, let's think about combos. I'd be a little concerned about ace-queen, ace-10. That can now call this turn, but I think with the exception of clubs, I don't know if he's calling ace-10 on this flop. I think probably not. But he certainly may be. His fast call could mean a pocket pair like I was thinking, or it could mean just a king that has an auto call. And I think it's rarely a slow play, but it's a good trick that I have known some players to make with their slow plays. And here I'm negotiating with Faker Real because he's playing 15 different people, and I'm trying to make a video, so if he wants to 8-table me, I'll do it, but if he wants to 1-table me, I would rather just make this video. I'm just trying to decide if I want to 2-barrel with this no-equity hand, just based on how often he has pocket pairs. It's a situation where, let's say it goes check-check and the river is a 3. I'm not excited about bluffing, even though it's plenty credible. It's just that 5s can decide that I was bluffing and call, whereas on the turn, even if 5s thinks I'm bluffing, you just can't call. Or you really, really shouldn't, just due to the fact that I always have equity and very often will barrel, and the times that I don't have the best hand, I still get to win enough of them that, in a sense, it makes it like I do have the best hand that much more often. So the reason I'd rather bet this turn than check and bet river is just due to the fact that I think a lot of his range that is less than king X. And certainly the jack didn't improve it unless he has jacks, which didn't 4-bet, which he doesn't have. So the jack doesn't help his range except for ace-queen. Ace-10 and Jack X of clubs, or Queen-10 of clubs, let's say. I think he has enough one-pair hands that, betting, what is there, 388 in the pot, betting near 300 or even 270, 250 is going to show an immediate profit. So I would like to see myself do that. Here on the PLO table, I call twice. He gave me a very good price with my pair plus flush draw. And he checks me on the river. That's interesting. I know this isn't a PLO video. The problem is he can check call with a better 2-pair occasionally, but I think I just have to value bet when both flush draws miss. Looks like I'm going to go for the check back because I just don't see the value. Yeah, I think I should have bet that spot. I mean, obviously, he has a very tough call with aces, but I think that's just, he has one pair so frequently. And I do want to bluff there with some of my missed draws. Whatever. Meanwhile, I missed the 2 hands on the left table, so let's see. Okay, so he check calls the turn with the ace-10 after I check back flop. And I go for value on the river diamond, very standard. I don't think he has diamonds. I don't think the 8 improves him very often, and I basically always have the best hand. Unfortunately, my line looks very credible, and he folds. Bottom left table looks like I raise and c-bet, but let's make sure. Sorry about all this. Yeah. I raise and c-bet on ace-high 3 flush board, which I think is just it's fine. It's going to show an immediate profit, I think. And I'm just going to give up from there. Not a lot to talk about. And the question is, did I bet this turn on the top right table? I think you guys already saw the result, but I didn't because I was focusing on some other hands. As I time down everywhere, I might have been a little too distracted to make the bet that I now like. And I check this turn, which is fine. Curious to see what he does. I'm going to fold this river with the 9-8. I think it's pretty standard. Check, check. I river 6, so now I'm going to check. Not a massive difference in showdown value, but like I said, I think he can find some calls with better hands. I think occasionally I win against an ace-high or pocket 5s or something. And he does muck, which probably means a turn bet would have worked. We'll see. Unless he has like a suited ace of clubs. Oh, wow, 6-5 of clubs. So actually kind of standard by him, and he would have gotten away with his river bet. had he not paired. But I think he probably would have folded the turn. So I kind of like my turn bet there. I didn't talk a lot about his club hands, which make a lot of sense. And if I was not distracted by this at the time, I would have taken a note that he called quickly with a weak flush draw on a king 7 deuce board, and even though I don't have any kind of strong read based on that, it's something that as I continue to take notes and see what he calls quickly with and slowly with, and how he plays other hands, I can kind of develop some insight into his mind, his thought process there. In this case, I think what a lot of people do when they make weak calls is they have a hand that they know they're calling with, but they're not super excited about it. They certainly never consider raising, and they just go ahead and click the call button. And I think, there's some level of psychology where people want to seem stronger, so they quickly call. And even if it's not conscious, I think people do that to discourage further betting. Call in the big blind against a 2.5x, queen 8. I think I could probably go ahead and raise here. I'm not making many better hands fold because I have queen high. I guess floating is another alternative, but I'm not going to try to show down my queen high if I float. I'll try to bluff with it. I think it's just going to show a profit. I just got a country read that he's from Singapore, so I decided to float. I think raising is going to be too profitable. So I prefer to do that. I'm toying around with the idea of raising turn after he bets big twice. He bet big and quickly. Not big, but normal and quickly. Sorry if that sounds annoying. It's my thinking sound. I think he probably has it a little bit too often here, or has a hand like jacks that he's probably not going to fold. I think that makes even more sense than having a king. But a lot of players just have a big hand and quickly bet twice. I think I'm going to fold now. But, if that read is right, then my float becomes pretty good because he gives me a lot of information when he checks and check folds. So I don't mind my play there. I think raising right away is going to work more frequently. It doesn't allow him to catch anything. Looks like now in this session I'm a little bit distracted by the possibility of starting to 8-table PLO, which I hope you guys understand is a little bit more exciting at the time of playing than these tables. So I'm facing a 3-bet on the bottom left table from a reg. I know I've seen his name pop up a few times on a couple tables. And I have king 7 suited, which I think could probably make a barely profitable call, in my opinion, given that we're a little bit deep. I think at 100 big blinds I can't call with this against reasonable players. It looks like I'm deciding if I want to 4-bet due to stack size. I think it's pretty awkward stack size for him to do anything about a 4-bet. So let's say, or let me think this through. If I go to like 80, 75 to 85, somewhere in there, I gotta stop right clicking. That leaves me with another 610 behind. He can make it like 170 and fold to a jam, I guess. I guess it's not that awkward if he wants to play the pre-flop war game, but there are just so many hands that are auto 3-betting, like my queen 10 offsuit before, or ace jack, and he's not gonna want to get it in with ace jack. He may have ace jack suited and just call, but that's not really a terrible result for me. And I have a little bit of playability since I'm suited. I have the king blocker, which is somewhat relevant. I think as in the past, nobody called these 4-bets, but people now, as people are getting better, they're calling 4-bets because they realize that people are against a polarized 4-bet range. They actually don't do too poorly post-flop with a lot of their, decent high card connected hands. So it's nice to have a little playability rather than the king 3 offsuit that everybody used to always 4-bet with. Having a lot of trouble not right-clicking today. Top left table, it looks like I defend against a small raise with 5-10 suited, which is probably a little questionable, and check call flop, and then we check it down from there. Kind of odd that he's betting this river, given that it looks pretty strong for me. And here I go deciding to consider a check raise. It's very tough for me to have air with the exception of ace high, but given his smaller bet size, What is he doing? I'm trying to decide if he would have bet turn with King X. And the reason I'm trying to decide that is because if he doesn't bet, or if he does bet turn with King X, then his value bets on this river are 2-pair plus for the most part. And I'm not super excited to check raise a range of 2-pair plus. So if he bets turn with King X, I don't like this check raise, and I'd rather consider calling. Although this isn't a run out that I think people bluff very often. I think actually this is a check fold. The more I think about it, just because I just don't think people bluff this run out. And I think because they do get check raised, both for value and as bluffs. And I think he bets a lot of his kings for protection and value on the turn. So I don't think this is very many 1-pair hands for value. So I would like to see myself check fold. All right, I went for it. And he snap calls. Wow, okay. So everything I said was wrong. First of all, he did go for a thinner value with a small bet size, which is a good play because my range looks entirely like what it is, like the hand that I have, which is 1 pair. He can expect all my 2-pair combos or better to lead out, with the exception of some check raise value hands. But even those he might expect to lead out. So I think this is a case of me not thinking very clearly. Maybe it was PLO action that was distracting me, but also not giving him enough credit because this play shows that he's, well, probably shows that he's a smart thinking player. Occasionally it shows that he wanted to own me, which he did. Certainly did. So I don't really like my check raise there for all the reasons I mentioned, although my first read on the situation was way off. It was not giving him enough credit and thinking kind of too exploitatively. I guess after playing all summer with less tough players, I kind of forgot how smart 5-10 players are. But yeah, very good play by him. I think it's a standard value bet, given that I so often have ace high or 1 pair, and he is going to occasionally want to bluff like this. He went with a smaller sizing, which I'm not sure what to make of, but given the fact that he snap called a raise, I think he was actually probably considering inducing a bluff raise here, which, though my bluff raise, like it seems like nothing missed, but it's actually not super credible, given that 8-9 probably check raises the flop rather than check calls, at least most of the time. And I don't have a lot of 4x hands, and a lot of them would just lead rather than check raise, due to the fact that I think he has some showdown value that's not going to bet very often. Anyways, bad play by me, great play by him. So that's a nice point to wrap up the video. I guess I could play out this King 10 hand. I defend the big blind. And I face a bet. And it looks like I'm going to go ahead and start playing for value. This is interesting. So I do think that ranges in this spot are a little too polar, especially this deep. People usually tend to check raise for value with, I don't know, 2-pair or better. Occasionally, like the slow played jacks, which is pretty weird. I think this is a hand that I can certainly check raise for value, bet turn for value, and bet some rivers for value. And it's nice to have some hands in my range that play well on brick, rather than, a lot of my check raise is going to be bluffy. I lean towards betting this turn again for value against worse 10s and 9s, and it looks like I went with a slightly small, well, no, it's kind of reasonable bet size. Not a whole lot to say about it. I think this bottom right hand is a hand I talked about in video, spent a lot of time on in the first video. So he folds the turn there with my King 10, and I think somewhat, not fine result. I would have rather gotten called by a weaker hand, but I get to protect my hand against a lot of his range, which has a lot of equity since I only have 1 pair. And he likely has overs with or without a gutter or open-ender, probably with an open-ender, probably with a gutter. Or, a worse pair. Anyways, not going to talk too much about that. Just the flop decision I think was somewhat interesting, and I think it's important to have a wider value range than most people have in those spots, and have a range that plays well on board runouts that don't include, straight, connected cards. Top left table, 3-bet and get cold 4-bet jammed on by a 50 BB stack, and I'm not, ecstatic about it, but I am. I run into pairs sometimes, but for the most part, he has, like the most part, he has pairs that I'm flipping against. Occasionally, he has ace queen, and I'm just have a very easy call with my pot odds. Hand on the bottom right table is a hand that I talked about in the first video, so I'm not going to go in depth on it. So we'll just see this board run out and see what happens. And it looks like he had ace queen suited, pretty standard by him, standard by me, and I 3/4 him. I'd like to hear, as always, your thoughts on this video. Any questions you guys have. As I said in the past couple videos, Vegas has been crazy. It continues to be crazy, but it's over soon. And I look forward to talking to you guys in the forums and in the comments section. And, appreciate any feedback, as always. I will see you guys very soon with another video, probably tomorrow. This is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. Take care, guys.